Good morning, everyone. Hello, Joe from the UK. Great, good to see you. Hello, Ryan, Victoria, Ella, Andy, Jens, and anyone else that is currently logged in, but I can't really see. Hello, Demi. And hello, Bante, and hello, Stan. Stan might reappear again on the screen. He likes to do the cameos these days. And also scratch the screen of the computer. So if you can't see him, you can't hear him. All right. So this morning we will be studying the first part of the Sabbāsava Sutta. So it will be both this morning and tomorrow morning. And Stan is really into headbutting the computer. Relax. Okay, good to see you, Judy. Good to see you, Amy. And hello, Kyle. All right, so I'll pass it on to Bante so we can start without further ado.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So, good morning, friends. As mentioned, today we'll be looking at the first half of the Sabbāsava Sutta. This is Majjhima Nikaya number 2. This is a very important sutta for a number of reasons. So I'll start going through it as usual, and please enter questions whenever you wish, and I'll address them as well as I can at the end of the part of the sutta that we're looking at today. So first off, the title, Sabbāsava Sutta. So Sabbāsava is a compound of two words, Sabbā, which means all or entire, and Asava. So Asava gets translated many different ways. So here it's translated as corruption, which brings out one side of it. I've also seen it translated as pollutant, which communicates a similar meaning. One of the more common translations is taint, which is all right. Sometimes it's translated defilement, though that is more commonly used for the word kilesa. But there's a similar meaning with asava, so that's okay. Some of the other translations which I find less helpful, another one is fermentation, which makes me think about pickles rather than about defilements that corrupt and poison the mind. So fermentation I don't like because it just makes me think about like kombucha and vinegar and pickles and things, which doesn't, to me, don't have a negative connotation at all. Another one you might sometimes encounter is inflow or outflow, influx, which again, none of these do anything for me. Like they don't communicate to me at all the feeling of the word asava. They just make me think about rivers and dams and hydroelectric power plants and things which again don't have anything whatsoever to do with a corrupted, defiled mind. So for asava, I like translations along the lines of corruption, pollutant, defilement, and taint, because this is more clearly in line with how the Buddha uses the word. So on this occasion, we're using the translation corruption rather than the other ones. So we'll go ahead and start reading through the sutta. The sutta begins, "Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Savatthi in Jeta's grove in Anathapindika's park. There the Blessed One addressed the monks. 'Monks, Venerable Sir,' those monks replied to the Blessed One. The Blessed One said this, 'Monks, I say that the destruction of the corruptions is for one who knows and sees not for one who does not know, not for one who does not see. Monks, for one who knows what and sees what, do I declare the destruction of the corruptions, wise attention, and unwise attention. Monks, for one who attends unwisely, unarisen corruptions arise, and arisen corruptions increase. And, monks, for one who attends wisely, unarisen corruptions do not arise, and arisen corruptions are abandoned. So here the Buddha is introducing the basic idea of the sutta. So he's already starting with the premise that we understand that the asavas, the corruptions of the mind, are something that we want to destroy, something that we want to eliminate. And the reason for this is because they corrupt the mind, they poison the mind, they taint the mind, they pollute the mind. So naturally we want to clean up the mind, we want to purify the mind of these corrupting, polluting influences. And he says that in order to destroy the corruptions of the mind, we need to know and see, which knowing and seeing in the suttas refers to a direct understanding. So to know and see something, it's implying that it's not just an intellectual knowing, it's also a direct personal experience. And it's not just a direct experience, it's a direct experience coupled with full understanding. So it's not just knowing and it's not just seeing, it's both. It's knowing and seeing. So this, again, it implies a complete, thorough, direct, personal understanding of something. So both an intellectual understanding, but also a direct personal realization of something. So to directly personally know what? Wise attention and unwise attention. So the word that's used here in Pāli, that's translated as wise attention, is yoniso manasikara. So manasikara is usually translated as attention. And I think that's quite good. That's the way the word seems to be used throughout the suttas. But the word that's translated as wise, yoniso, this requires a little more explanation. There's substantial debate as to whether wise is really the best way to translate this word. So yoniso comes from the word yoni. Yoni literally means womb, source, origin, that which is the that which produces something. So yoniso means based upon the source, based upon the origin, deriving from a clear understanding of how things arise. So yoniso manasikara means paying attention to how things come into being, paying attention to how things arise. And so that's particularly relevant when we're dealing with the corruptions of the mind, is that we need to understand how these corruptions arise, how they come into being. And we also need to understand how they cease. We need to understand what is it that brings them to an end. So paying attention to our experience in a way that the corruptions come to an end, a way that they diminish and fade away. So that said, I've still chosen in this translation to use the rendering wise attention. So I've seen some other ways. So I don't remember off the top of my head how Bhante Sujato translates this one. I'm actually going to check briefly. Anyway, for the time being, I've chosen to continue using the translation. Okay, so Bhante Sujato just translates it proper attention rather than wise attention. So proper attention is also quite fine. It's a quite relevant and useful way of translating yoniso manasikara. For the record, he uses the translation defilements for asava. then next the Buddha gives basically a table of contents for the sutta. He says, monks, there are corruptions to be abandoned by seeing. There are corruptions to be abandoned by restraint. There are corruptions to be abandoned by using. There are corruptions to be abandoned by enduring. There are corruptions to be abandoned by avoiding. There are corruptions to be abandoned by removing. There are corruptions to be abandoned by developing. So again, this is basically a table of contents for the suttas, for the sutta. So over the course of the sutta, the Buddha will give a more detailed explanation of each one of these categories. But first, I'd just like to emphasize that there are, in fact, different categories and different practices which apply to the different categories. So there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to Dharma practice. There is not a cookie-cutter method or a Swiss Army knife method which works perfectly for every situation without an exception. But rather, depending upon the kind of mental corruptions that we're trying to eliminate, the methods that we apply and use will vary and may even be exact opposites of each other. So, for example, just taking a look here, we see corruptions to be abandoned by using, to be abandoned by enduring, to be abandoned by avoiding, to be abandoned by removing. These are all radically different things. So enduring is very different from avoiding. What should you endure versus what should you avoid? And this is all in the context of the progress towards awakening. So when the Buddha is talking here, he's talking about how we should relate to the experiences that we have in a way that leads to the reduction of our mental corruptions and helps us progress towards full enlightenment. So the first section is the longest. So we'll be spending most of the morning on this. In fact, depending on how this goes, we might wind up spending the rest of the sutta session just on the first section here. The first one is corruptions to be abandoned by seeing. So seeing here is dasana. That's the word that's being used, which commonly means seeing not just in the ordinary sense, like I am seeing a cat, but seeing in a deeper sense of a direct recognition of the truth of something, a direct recognition of reality as it is. So seeing in the suttas also has to do with our viewpoints and opinions. So the way we see reality. It's like, well, I see it this way. I see it that way. Also in English, we use seeing to, sometimes we use the word seeing to mean how we think about things or our opinions about things, our perspectives. So even the word perspective technically means how you look at something, but that also means what your opinion is on something. So the first section here, what are the corruptions to be abandoned by seeing? And the Buddha says, here, monks, an unlearned ordinary person, one who does not associate with noble ones, who has not mastered the teaching of the noble ones, who is undisciplined in the qualities of the noble ones, who does not associate with good people, who has not mastered the teaching of good people, who is undisciplined in the qualities of good people, does not understand phenomena that are to be paid attention to, and does not understand phenomena that are not to be paid attention to. Not understanding phenomena that are to be paid attention to, and not understanding phenomena that are not to be paid attention to, he pays attention to phenomena that are not to be paid attention to, and he does not pay attention to phenomena that are to be paid attention to. So this first section, first off, this is talking about the unlearned ordinary person, which in Pāli, that's asuttava patujana. So asuttava literally means someone who has not heard, who doesn't have a body of knowledge, a body of learning. And patujana comes from two parts. So puttu means broad, and jana means populous. So patujana means like the broad population. So the way most people are, common people, ordinary people, the majority of people. So an unlearned ordinary person, a common person, a person like most people in the world, and most people in the world don't really understand what the Buddha was talking about. In fact, most people in the world don't even know what the Buddha was talking about. And he further defines asuttva patujana as one who does not spend time with noble ones, which are people who have attained some degree of awakening, or with good people. So people who are trying to be awakened, people who are genuinely trying to cultivate wholesome qualities of mind. So the word translated as true people or good people is sappurisa. So these days I would probably lean towards good people rather than true people, as I had originally translated it here. And I'm looking at Bhante Sujata's translation, and he also chose good person for sappurisa. And so one who has not mastered the teachings of the noble ones or of good people, and who is undisciplined in the qualities of noble ones and of good people. So that also shows that there's two sides to Buddhist practice. There's the teaching and there's the training. So there's the concepts and there's the conduct. There's the ideas and there's the practice. So it's not enough just to learn the Dhamma. We also need to live it and apply it to everything that we do. And also noticing how often we make little exceptions in our mind. We're like, oh, well, the Buddha said not to be attached to anything. But he couldn't possibly have also meant like my family and my country and my reputation and so on. He couldn't possibly have meant those things. I'm definitely going to keep my attachment to those things. So just noticing the way that we make these little exceptions in our mind. We're like, well, yeah, I think I'm just going to have to disagree with the Buddha on some of these points. But what are we basing that on? Well, we're just basing that on our own preferences and opinions, which are the preferences and opinions of a delusional person. When we put it that way, it doesn't sound so appealing anymore, does it? So the other quality besides the teachings or the ideas being presented is to be well disciplined in them. So actually living a life of self-restraint, living a life of non-attachment, living a life of renunciation, and constantly training our mind, constantly watching our mind and observing the arising of unwholesome states and detaching from them, disconnecting from them, not furthering those unwholesome qualities and doing what we can to abandon them. And this is something the Buddha will talk about in more detail as we go through the sutta. How can we deal with the unwholesome qualities that arise in the mind? How can we work on letting go of them? And then working to cultivate wholesome qualities, good qualities of mind, which also the Buddha will talk about later on in the sutta. So that's being disciplined in the qualities of noble ones and of good people. But here we're talking about someone who is undisciplined. So they don't know the teachings. They don't spend time with people who know the teachings. They don't practice the teachings. Realistically, they're probably not even particularly interested in the teachings. But also this can describe someone who is interested in the Dhamma. They're just maybe very early in their practice and not particularly committed yet, or they're just kind of like scouting out the periphery of the teachings. So that would still be considered an asuttva patujana. And actually commonly the word asuttva patujana is used to refer to anyone who has not attained at least the first stage of awakening. But I think that's a little bit harsh. Maybe a little bit of a stretch from what the Buddha intended. But nonetheless, the asuttva patujana, the unlearned ordinary person, does not understand what one should pay attention to and what one should not pay attention to. And next, the Buddha defines what he means by that. He says, and monks, what are the phenomena which are not to be paid attention to that he pays attention to? That's which the Asutta Patujana pays attention to. Says, monks, for one who pays attention to such phenomena, the unarisen sensuality taint arises. That should be sensuality corruption. So I seem to have missed something. I'll correct that later today. For one who pays attention to such phenomena, the unarisen sensuality corruption arises, and the arisen sensuality corruption increases. The unarisen existence corruption arises, and the arisen existence corruption increases. The unarisen ignorance corruption arises, and the arisen ignorance corruption increases. These are the phenomena which are not to be paid attention to, that he pays attention to. So basically, any kind of mental activity which causes us to get more lost in sensuality, more attached to sensuality, more obsessed with sensuality, or anything which makes us increasingly attached to states of existence, states of being, what we want to be, what we want to become, or anything that enhances our delusion, anything that enhances our ignorance, our misunderstanding of reality. So these are all in the category of things which are not to be paid attention to, but which the Asutta Patujana, the unlearned ordinary person, pays attention to, which then causes the increase and arising of their internal corruptions. Then the next category says, monks, what are the phenomena which are to be paid attention to that he does not pay attention to? Monks, for one who pays attention to such phenomena, the unarisen sensuality taint does not arise, and the arisen sensuality taint is abandoned. The unarisen existence taint does not arise, and the arisen existence taint is abandoned. The unarisen ignorance taint does not arise, and the arisen ignorance corruption is abandoned. These are the phenomena which are to be paid attention to that he does not pay attention to. So this again is recognizing that when we direct the mind in a proper way, an appropriate way, then our obsession with sensuality should diminish, should decrease. Similarly, our attachment to states of being, our wish to become something in particular or to experience a certain state of being, that also diminishes. And our ignorance is reduced and abandoned. Our delusions start to fade away, and we develop an accurate, correct understanding of reality. So this is the result of applying our mind properly, of directing our mind in the proper way. But as mentioned, this is not what the unlearned ordinary person does. And then the Buddha sums this up quite simply. He says, for one who pays attention to phenomena that are not to be paid attention to, and does not pay attention to phenomena that are to be paid attention to, unarisen corruptions arise, and arisen corruptions increase. One attends unwisely in this way. Did I exist in the past? Did I not exist in the past? What was I in the past? How was I in the past? Having been what was I in the past? Will I exist in the future? Will I not exist in the future? What will I be in the future? How will I be in the future? Having been what will I be in the future? Or one is internally confused about the present, thinking, do I exist? Do I not exist? What am I? How am I? Where did this being come from? Where will it be going? So these are all examples of what not to do, by the way. So getting lost in any of these self-centered perspectives about me, this speculation about past and future, or muddled lack of awareness of the present moment. So those are the three main categories here. So the first one is speculation about the past. Did I exist in the past? What was I like in the past? What did I do in the past? So speculation about the past. The second category is speculation about the future. What will I be in the future? What will it be like in the future? What will I become in the future? So speculating about the future. And the third one is confusion about the present. Like, do I exist? Do I not exist? What am I? How am I? Where did this being come from? Where will it go? So this is all examples of useless thinking, useless speculative thinking, which does not bring us one step closer to awakening, does not bring us one step closer to true happiness and true peace. So this is something that we need to watch out for. When we start to get lost in this kind of useless speculative thinking, we should stop immediately. Because all this does is enhance our wrong view, enhances our misunderstanding of reality, and it's the basis for our mental corruptions getting worse. So the Buddha continues. He says, for one who attends unwisely in this way, one of 6 perspectives arises. The perspective, I have a self, arises for him as true and reliable. That's kind of the standard misperception that most people have. So the belief that one possesses some kind of ongoing, persistent self. Second one, the perspective, I do not have a self, arises for him as true and reliable. And at this point, if you're familiar with Buddhist thought, you might think, wait, isn't that correct? Isn't that the right way? But there's a subtle problem here, which is I do not have a self. So in Pali, it's nati me atta. So me is me, I, mine. So I do not have a self is still a perspective on self. It's still a perspective of me, of mine, of I, of who I am, what I am. So although it's a little bit closer to the truth than I have a self, the perspective I do not have a self is still based upon self. It's still based upon me. It's still based upon the belief in self-existence. Next, the perspective possessing a self, I perceive a self, arises for him as true and reliable. This is, again, a fairly standard one. It's believing that we have some kind of persistent, ongoing self, and that we are seeing it, we're recognizing it. Next, the perspective possessing a self, I perceive non-self, arises for him as true and reliable. Again, this is slightly closer to the truth, slightly closer to reality, but still a little bit, actually quite a bit off. So it's believing that one possesses some kind of persistent, ongoing self, but that one is able to see things which are not self. So that's getting a little bit closer. Third, the perspective not possessing a self, I perceive a self. Let me just check the Pali here. Arises for him as true and reliable. So this is thinking, once again, maybe one doesn't have the view of possessing some kind of persistent, ongoing self-identity, but one still sees things in terms of me and mine. One still relates to things in terms of me and mine. And then finally, we have, or this perspective occurs to him, there is this self of mine which can speak and feel, which experiences the results of good and bad actions. This self of mine is permanent, fixed, eternal, unchangeable, and it will remain like this forever. So this, again, is a common expression of the belief in an eternal soul. The belief that there is some essential core element to each being which exists eternally. So an identity, like a name tag, like somewhere buried deep within all of our bodies and minds is a name tag. And it remains like that forever. So you can always track someone, like their social security number. You can track someone. Even if they change their name, they change their clothes, they get cosmetic surgery, they shave their head, you can still track them by their social security number, in theory. So again, this is a common belief that people have, that there is something in them which will exist eternally, which identifies them. So this also is the product of this kind of speculation, because the speculation of like, oh, what was I in the past? What will I be in the future? What am I now? It's all building up. It's reifying. It's strengthening our belief in self-existence. It's strengthening our tendency, our habit of always relating to the world in terms of me and mine, in terms of self and other. So it's constantly building up this persistent, ongoing delusional habit that we have of relating to the world based upon our concepts of self, rather than based on what's actually happening. So the Buddha says, and this is very beautiful in that ouch kind of way, the Buddha says, monks, this is called arrival at perspectives, the thicket of perspectives, the wilderness of perspectives, the agitation of perspectives, the struggle of perspectives, the fetter of perspectives. Monks, fettered by the fetter of perspectives, the unlearned ordinary person is not freed from birth, old age, dying, sorrow, grief, pain, depression, and anguish. He is not freed from unsatisfactoriness, I say. That's dukkha. So in the Sutta translation, I had apparently translated dukkha as unsatisfactoriness, which is admittedly a slightly unsatisfactory translation, but it does fairly accurately pin down the meaning of the word dukkha. So the word translated here as perspective, by the way, is ditti. So the word ditti, it actually quite literally means seen, like how you've seen something, how you viewed something, how you looked at something. And so again, that has the applied meaning of one's perspective, one's opinion. So another way you could translate this section is, this is called arrival at opinions, the thicket of opinions, the wilderness of opinions, the agitation of opinions, the struggle of opinions, the fetter of opinions. Or viewpoints, arrival at viewpoints, the thicket of viewpoints, etc. So these are all valid ways of handling this particular section. And ditti in Pāli, if it's not preceded by the word samma, so samma ditti means right view, correct perspective, an accurate vision of reality. So if you don't see samma ditti, if you just see the word ditti by itself, then almost always that by default means miccha ditti, wrong view, distorted perspective, wrong understanding. So if you ever see ditti just by itself, then that almost always means wrong view, miccha ditti. Which is how it's being used here. It's being used in that automatically wrong way, the way which immediately implies something that's incorrect or inaccurate. So then the Buddha goes on to the happy side of the equation. He says, monks, a disciple of the noble ones, that's Arya Savaka. So here I translated that as a noble disciple, but these days I usually translate that as disciple of the noble ones. So in Pali, that's Suttava Arya Savaka. So Suttava means, again, one who has learned, one who has heard. And Arya Savaka has two parts. So Arya means noble one, or noble. And Savaka means literally one who listens. So one who listens to the noble ones. Arya Savaka, one who listens to the noble ones. So a learned disciple of the noble ones, one who associates with noble ones, who has mastered the teaching of the noble ones, who is well disciplined in the qualities of the noble ones, who associates with good people, who has mastered the teaching of good people, who is well disciplined in the qualities of good people, understands phenomena that are to be paid attention to, and understands phenomena that are not to be paid attention to. Understanding phenomena that are to be paid attention to and that are not to be paid attention to, he does not pay attention to phenomena that are not to be paid attention to, and he does pay attention to phenomena that are to be paid attention to. And amongst what are the phenomena which are to be paid, which are not to be paid attention to, that he does not pay attention to, and he goes through the same thing. So basically, one should not pay attention to anything which causes one's sensuality corruption, existence corruption, or ignorance corruption to increase. So the wise disciple of the noble ones does not pay attention to such things. And one should pay attention to things which causes one's corruptions to decrease. So that's what the learned disciple of the noble ones does pay attention to. And then the Buddha gives the method. He says, one wisely attends. This is dukkha. It's unsatisfactoriness in this translation. This is dukkha. One wisely attends. This is the source of dukkha. One wisely attends. This is the cessation of dukkha. One wisely attends. This is the practice which leads to the cessation of dukkha. For one who wisely attends in this way, three fetters are abandoned: the perspective of self-identity, doubt, and wrong grasp of habitual practices. Monks, these are called the corruptions to be abandoned by seeing. In other words, the proper way to pay attention to phenomena is in terms of the Four Noble Truths. So it's always relating to our experience, not in terms of me and mine, I am this, I am that, what was I, what will I be, what is my current self-identity. So not relating to the world in terms of me and mine and what I want and what I was and what I will be. Because all of that just fuels our sensuality, it just fuels our craving, it fuels our self-obsession, it fuels our confusion, it fuels our delusion, which all fuels our dukkha. And it all builds up this persistent feeling of discomfort and discontent. So instead, we see the world in terms of the Four Noble Truths. So recognizing, oh, that's dukkha. That's what dukkha is like. Oh, that's the arising of dukkha. And oh, that's the cessation of dukkha. And that's what can be done in order to bring about the cessation of dukkha. So always relating to it in this way. And the interesting thing about this is that it's just looking at the world in terms of causal processes. So we don't need to think of it in terms of I, me, or mine. I am feeling dukkha. You can just see there is dukkha. And this is a very interesting experience, actually. Whenever you're next experiencing dukkha, which is probably right now. So whenever you're next experiencing dukkha, instead of thinking, I am feeling dukkha, I am uncomfortable, I am upset, I am agitated, I am in pain, whatever it is. Instead, just recognize that is dukkha. So looking at it as though it was an external object, not me, not mine. Just seeing, oh, that is dukkha. Okay, I see it. I understand it. Yep, that's dukkha. And recognizing as it arises, so dukkha samudaya. Samudaya literally means arising. So aya means go, ud means up, and sang means complete or together. So samudaya means literally arising. So, that's the arising of dukkha. So see it as it comes into being, understanding what caused it to come into being. So recognizing, oh, that desire caused the dukkha to appear. Gotcha. Oh, that aversion caused the dukkha to appear. Okay, I understand. So seeing the arising of dukkha and seeing the cessation of dukkha. It's like, oh, the dukkha is fading. It's going away. Why is it going away? It's going away because I stopped indulging in desire and aversion. That's why. Okay, I understand. I see. And recognizing that ability to understand and recognize the source of dukkha, that ability to let it go and allow it to fade away, comes through practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, through developing sila, samadhi, and panya. So developing kindness, mental unification, and wisdom. So this is recognizing the Four Noble Truths, and you can recognize it in each moment. In fact, this is a really wonderful practice that you can do all throughout your day. As you go through the day, constantly watch. Be on the lookout for the arising of dukkha. And when you see the arising of dukkha, recognize, oh, that's dukkha. And then see what's causing it to arise. Oh, that's dukkha samudaya. That's the cause of dukkha, the cause for the arising of dukkha. And then as the dukkha starts fading, recognize, oh, that's the fading of dukkha. That's the ceasing of dukkha. And it's caused by what? It's caused by the fading of the cause of dukkha. And noticing how when we follow the principles of the Noble Eightfold Path, then it's much easier to let go of dukkha. It's much easier to recognize dukkha, samudaya, and nirodha. Dukkha, it's arising and it's ceasing. So you can do this all day long. So this is not just something you do in meditation practice. It's what you do while you're washing the dishes, while you're eating your lunch, while you're talking to your friends, if you have any, or while you're doing your work, if you have any, or while you're doing anything or engaging in anything, or even when you're doing nothing. And it's actually amazing how much dukkha we can experience just doing nothing. Like sitting quietly in a peaceful room with nice people, and the mind can be absolutely overrun with a hurricane of dukkha, flooded with a lake of dukkha. And it's like, oh, why is this so bad? Oh, this is dukkha. I see this dukkha. It is dukkha. And actually, just that first perspective, so taking on that first step of seeing dukkha, already diminishes most of its power. And actually, the dukkha usually starts fading the moment we look at it from this third person perspective. Instead of, oh, this is awful, I hate this so much. Instead, we're like, oh, that is dukkha. And right there, the moment we shift perspective from, I'm in so much dukkha, to that is dukkha. Just that single switch defangs it, declaws the dukkha. It loses its power immediately. So right there, it cuts out about 90% of the stain. And then as we recognize the arising of dukkha, we're like, okay, I see. The dukkha is coming up because of the mental corruptions that I was feeding just a moment ago. I see. So that extra layer of understanding diminishes the power of the dukkha a bit more. And then we watch as the dukkha starts fading. One thing, recognizing that dukkha does in fact come to an end, it does in fact fade. That already is a joyful thing, recognizing that dukkha fades. Because often when we're in the midst of dukkha, we're just like, oh, this is terrible, it will last for eternity, life is awful. But actually, if you watch, you're like, no, it comes and goes like everything else. It has its ups and downs, its peaks and valleys, like everything else. So seeing that the dukkha fades is already, once again, taking away a bit more of its power. And recognizing that the fading of dukkha is something that we can direct the mind towards, then the dukkha loses all of its power. Because we realize that we can choose whether or not the dukkha comes. We can choose whether or not we're lost in dukkha. So this is the proper way to attend. And you'll notice that in this, there's no me, there's no mind, there's no I. There's just observing the causal process as it comes and goes. It's observing the phenomena that are present and understanding how they come and go, understanding how they arise and cease, how they appear and vanish. So when one practices in this way, since one is simply seeing a causal process arising and ceasing, then the sense of self, the sense of me and mine, starts to drop away. And also, since one has a direct understanding of the Four Noble Truths, then one's doubt drops away. And since one recognizes that this direct understanding of the Four Noble Truths is done through clearly knowing and seeing, rather than through engaging in any kind of habitual practice or ceremony of any sort, then naturally the three fetters to stream entry, which are self-view, so self-identity, doubt, and the wrong grasp of habitual practices, these three fetters start to fade away, they start to diminish. So that's the first half or so of the sutta. So I think at this time we should go ahead and switch to questions, if there are any. So if you have questions about the sutta, please go ahead and enter them in the live chat, and I'll take the questions in the order that they appear. Okay.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you so much, Bhante, for teaching. This is one of my favorite suttas, so I'm very glad to be going through it with you. So hello, Donald, Alicia, Cam, Key, Edward, Rupa, Suzanne, Laura, Maria, Alicia, and Marielle, and you, Elaine, lots of friends that have showed up. So Donald says, good morning, Bhante. How would you analyze the process of experience in terms of the primacy of asavas and the three poisons in ignorance and wisdom?
Can you say that again?
How would you analyze the process of experience in terms of the primacy of asavas and the three poisons in ignorance and wisdom?
I don't understand what you mean by primacy of experience. Can you put that in kindergarten language, please? I don't understand.
Right. So Donald, if you can elaborate, that would be great. And Suzanne says, ferment comes from the Latin word meaning to boil. It also means to stir up, agitate, or excite. It can also imply an element of something rotting, irreversibly spoiling, and becoming sour because of a proliferation of bacteria. When I have a resentment, I would say it definitely ferments my mind. It's like we say someone is stewing over something. Perhaps translators were thinking of pickles when they suggested ferment. Once a cucumber pickles, it can never be a cucumber again, and vinegar can never turn back into wine, which in turn can never again be grape juice. So there is a thread there of things that are fresh and sweet being soured and spoiled irreversibly. Looking at it that way lends some urgency to stopping that process in the mind.
Okay, thank you. I still don't like fermentation because I like pickles. So when people say like, oh, fermentation is the process through which you make pickles, I'm like, oh, I like fermentation. Fermentation, good. Or I like kombucha as well, which is another fermentation process. I'm like, ooh, fermentation, good. But yeah, the idea that it's the process through which things get spoiled or rotten, through which they lose their sweetness, that definitely has a direct relevance to how the word asava is used. So it's important to keep in mind, of course, that nothing is permanent. So of course, you can't turn a pickle back into a fresh cucumber, but you can turn a rotten mind into a pure mind. Yeah, thank you.
And Ramon says, how would we write the true statement then of this sentence? The perspective I have a self arises from him as true and reliable.
What's the right version of that statement?
How would we write the true statement then of this sentence? Quote unquote. The perspective I have a self arises for him as true and reliable.
Let's see. You might say something like, when there is delusion, the perspective of self arises. When there is no delusion, the perspective of self does not arise. That would be a true statement.
And Donald clarified on his, I'll repeat the question in case you don't remember. How would you analyze the process of experience in terms of the primacy of asavas and the three poisons in ignorance and wisdom? And he says, by primacy of experience, I mean which one is the cause of the other?
So I take the asavas and the three poisons as just being different ways of talking about the same thing. So they're just subtle variations, different ways of categorizing defilements of mind, but they're still talking about the same fundamental defilements. Yeah.
And Elaine says, physical pain. How does one attribute the source of the cause? I have medical conditions that can account for it and have been unable to apply the arising of it to aversion.
So there are physical sensations, and the physical sensations can have medical causes. The most common medical cause being birth. So the moment you're born, then that's the cause to experience a lifetime of physical pain. So, of course, physical pain is part of life. You can't avoid it. Some people get more than others for various reasons. But physical pain, it's a sensation that arises in the body. Whether or not we experience dukkha is a decision. This is really important to understand. Physical sensations are just physical sensations. Sensations do not cause dukkha. Desire for the sensation to be different causes dukkha. Aversion to a sensation that is present causes dukkha. Fear of a sensation causes dukkha. Ignorance of a sensation causes dukkha. The sensation itself is not dukkha. The sensation itself is not a cause of dukkha. The sensation is just a sensation, nothing else, nothing more, nothing less. So with physical pain, if you want to get through it, look directly at it without turning away. Pay full attention to it with complete tolerance, complete acceptance, and a genuine wish to understand exactly what it is. And do that for as long as you have to. It might just be a few seconds if you're really good at this practice. It might be several minutes. But realistically, it might take hours. And it might take days. And it might take years. But until you learn what pain is, it will continue to harass you. So at some point, we have to turn towards it and look directly at it. Accept it as it is. And investigate what's going on. Try to piece apart the physical sensation itself from the mental reaction to the sensation. And once you do that, you'll see that the physical sensation itself is neutral. It's inherently neutral. It's not pain. It's just sensation. The reaction is mental. That's what makes it painful. And that's what we have control over. That's where we can get a foot in the door. That's where we can interrupt the process. So once you realize this, then you will never relate to physical pain the same way again. It will never have as much power over you as it does now. This is really life transforming, especially if you have chronic pain, but it's life transforming for everyone. Okay.
Thank you. And Michelle says, Bante, I noticed we shouldn't be concerned about our next birth, but was wondering, is it always on Earth? What if we ruin this planet?
Well, so I have good news and I have bad news. Well, actually, it's all bad news or all good news or realistically, it's just news. We add the value judgment. So the good news is that there's an infinite number of planets. The bad news is that if we have contributed to the ruination of this planet, then that's the karmic causes to be reborn somewhere else with a pre-ruined planet. On the other hand, if we practice ecological responsibility and we try to preserve and maintain this planet as best we can within our means, then that's the karmic condition to be reborn somewhere with a planet that's in good condition. Okay?
And Raymond asks, I have another question. When practicing Vipassana and realize that my mind is lost in thought, then I worry about not practicing correctly. Is this something to pay attention to or not in the context of this sutta?
Now, the moment you notice that you're lost, just immediately return to the meditation method. Don't do anything else. Just immediately go back to the method without hesitation. The faster and the more uncompromising you are about ceasing wandering thought and returning immediately to the meditation method, then the sooner you'll get over the wandering thought problem. Okay.
And Sally says, how to eliminate the delusion of self when we have strong sense of self?
Well, your problem is shared by pretty much everyone. So the solution is Buddhist practice. Actually, to be perfectly honest, every single thing in Buddhism is about letting go of sense of self. Everything we do relates either directly or indirectly to letting go of self-identity. This is the goal of Buddhist practice. It's what it's all about. So just keep practicing Buddhism as sincerely as you can. And as time goes by, this problem will start to diminish and fade. But also watch. Where do you have the strongest sense of self-identity? Where do you get lost in me and mine? And make an extra effort to apply Buddhist practice in those areas. Okay.
And Sally also says, I remember the method to count how many I arise in one day. And that person counted hundreds of times. Maybe, can we be mindful and recognize the I, me, mine, then record how many times? For mine might be more than thousands of times.
I've never done that particular practice. I mean, if it helps, it helps. I don't know. I haven't done it. If you want to try it out, you're certainly welcome to try it out. Realistically, the main way that we learn things is by trying them out and seeing what happens. So you're of course welcome to try it out and see what happens. It might be good for you. It might help you. And if so, that's great. That's great. Whatever works. But yeah, what I really recommend is the perception of impermanence. Recognizing that what you think you are is just an impermanent causal process. Makes a tremendous difference. And also actively practicing humility throughout the day. And always asking yourself, what is it that I think I am? And whatever it is, recognize, oh, that's not me. It can't possibly be me. It's just another temporary process. But it's not ultimately who I am. This starts to wear away that sense of self. But also recognize that this practice is a long practice. It takes a long time. It doesn't happen quickly or easily. There is no shortcut. So you just keep going, one step at a time. Okay?
Thank you, Mountain. And Elaine says, regarding to physical pain, so difficult.
Yeah, true.
I so wish I could sit with you and go through the process. Love you, Mountain. Thank you, Venerables, for all you do. The world is a better place because of you both. Aww.
Well, once the pandemic crisis is over, you're welcome to come and practice with us for a little while.
And Jayesh says, the Goenka Vipassana retreats aim at training you to observe sensation as it is to come out of dukkha. He says the Buddha identified a key link to get over dukkha in the paticca samuppada dependent origination. Vedana gives rise to tanha, but if it becomes Vedana, giving rise to panya, wisdom, that the sensation Vedana is impermanent, can lead to eradication of dukkha.
Is that a question or a comment?
I guess it's a comment, but maybe do you want to address anything about the comment or not?
I mean, I would just say that, as I mentioned the other day, you can interrupt the process of dependent origination anywhere in the chain. So historically, teachers have often emphasized the Vedana Tanha link, but actually anywhere in the chain is fine. And the root of it is avidya. The root of it is not knowing and seeing the Four Noble Truths, not knowing and seeing the three characteristics. So actually, the way I practice and the way I teach is mostly aimed at directly at the root, rather than at some point along the chain. But actually, as you practice anywhere at any point along the chain, then that makes it easier to get at the root. And it's kind of like when you want to dig up a bush, for example. Like you've got a big thorn bush. Well, in the beginning, it's actually quite hard to get directly at the root because it's behind a bunch of thorny branches sticking out from the trunk of the bush. So the first thing you do is you start cutting off a bunch of the branches. And as you cut off more and more of the branches, then it gets easier to see where the center of the bush is. And it gets easier to access the base of the bush with a shovel. And eventually, after you cut off most of the branches, then it's relatively easy to dig up the bush by its roots. So in the same with our practice. Of course, what we're trying to do is to uproot avidya, to uproot this fundamental delusional ignorance. But practically speaking, the more we trim off the branches, the sprouting manifestations of dukkha, then the easier it is for us to see the root clearly and to strike directly at the root. Okay.
All right. And Maria says, hi, Bhantanaya, is there a method or practice to help stop self-harm when the suffering is caused by addiction, for example, to smoking?
Yeah, well, first off, I recommend seeing some addiction counselors. So this is something which, while it is included within the scope of Buddhist practice, there's a lot of particular details of addiction treatment, which I'm not an expert in. I'm not a master at substance addiction. So I recommend, looking into the addiction treatment resources that are available to you. There are some Buddhist addiction recovery groups. The most well-known one is, I think these days they call themselves Recovery Dharma. Is that right?
You mean the Refuge Recovery?
It used to be called Refuge Recovery, but I think they changed the name to Recovery Dharma. Anyway, there's a number of other Buddhist themed addiction recovery groups. So if you want something specifically Buddhist themed, those are things you can look into. Otherwise it does all fit into Buddhist practice. So recognizing the addiction pattern, recognizing the desire, the aversion, the delusion, recognizing the triggers. So what kind of experiences trigger us to engage in compulsive addictive behavior? So what is it? Is it loneliness? Is it boredom? Is it irritation? Is it agitation? Is it drowsiness? What is it? Sometimes it's actually pleasant things. There's a friend of mine who he has a certain form of addiction, and he's actually mostly got it under control these days. But the trigger for him was actually happiness. when he was very happy and cheerful and upbeat, then he would start thinking, oh, what can I do to make this even more intense? What can I do to make my happiness even stronger? And so then that would trigger his addictive craving. So sometimes it's not negative moods. Sometimes it's actually happiness or cheerfulness that can trigger us into compulsive addictive behaviors. So try to see what the triggers are. In particular, try to get in touch with the underlying dukkha, the underlying defilements, and address that dukkha directly. Address those defilements directly. So those are some ways that you can apply Buddhist practice to those situations. Another really important thing is the step down method. So there was so in Thailand, a lot of monks smoke cigarettes, which often surprises and shocks people who are not familiar with Thailand, because in the rest of the Buddhist world, it's considered very inappropriate for monks to smoke. Thailand is the only country I know of where it's socially acceptable. So there was a monk who he'd been trained in Thailand, and he was used to smoking, and it was used to it being okay for him to smoke. And then he came to California and started living at a monastery in California. And at that time, the monk was smoking 2 packs a day, which is horrifying for anyone, but especially for a monk, that's really, really horrifying. And so the abbot of the monastery was very kind. He just said, well, right now you smoke 40 cigarettes a day. Tomorrow, smoke 39. The day after, smoke 38. The day after, smoke 37. So also just seeing what can you do to gradually reduce your addictive pattern. Because if you immediate stopping is usually not the solution. But this is starting to get into specific methodologies, which once again is not my expertise. So I recommend connecting with Buddhist recovery groups and addiction treatment programs and see what resources there are. There's a tremendous amount. So see what's out there to help you. Okay.
Thank you, Bante. And Donald is asking, so the asavas arise with the sense of self, no asavas. Is it so? Then if asavas arise, obviously the delusion of self or dependent arising is the cause, yes?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Avijja, paccaya, sankhara, etc. It all comes back to avijja.
And Sally says, the self-identity in the area which is very strong is, for example, I want to be reborn in a good place that can learn Dhamma until enlightenment. How to eliminate the sense of self in this aspect?
Oh, keep that one. That one's good. Yeah, keep that one. It's the other manifestations of self-identity that you should work on overcoming first. Because trust me, that's not the strong one. What's the other self-identity issues? Often it's just the simple, common one of thinking, I am this body. Comes up all the time. I am this body. We really believe that. Most of us, anyway. We really believe that. Start with that. Or I am these habits. I am these thoughts. I am these emotional patterns. I am these preferences. I am the person who likes vanilla. I am the person who likes chocolate. I am the person who doesn't like country music. I am the person who hates the sound of leaves in the wind, whatever it is. So that's where I recommend first looking. So something more refined and wholesome, like may I always be reborn in a place where I can practice the Dharma, that's actually fine. You can, you'll need to deal with that eventually, but that's way down the road because that one's mixed in with all kinds of wholesome things. Start with the more blatantly unwholesome ones. Start with the more blatant forms of self-identity and self-attachment. I am this body, I am these preferences, I am these thoughts, I am these emotions, I am these patterns. Start with that. That's where the problem is. Not in wanting to be born close to the Dhamma. That's not the problem.
And Mehmet has a question. Bhante, can one stop the non-stop talking in the mind by observing how the words and sentences arise, even sentences like there is dukkha, and see one is not the owner saying the sentence?
You can, but honestly, I think that if you do that, you're just going to get lost in more thinking. You can try it, but I'm a little bit doubtful that that's going to be particularly effective for you. It might be, which is why I say you can try it, but I'm doubtful. Honestly, the best ways to cut through a lot of thinking, one is to just drown it out. So use a repetition in your mind and just drown out the thoughts with repetitive thought. A very direct method. So again, I use the word focus, but other people like to use other words or other phrases, and that's fine. But whatever it is, you just repeat it over and over and over again, persistently, fiercely, driving out all the other thoughts from the mind. Kind of like when your neighbor is playing music, so you turn on your own stereo and you crank it up even louder, just drowning out their noise with your own noise. So it's like that. We're just drowning out the noise of the mind with a specific repetitive noise. Preferably something with a peaceful meaning or a Dharma related meaning. And you can even use 2 tracks in the mind. So I've done this occasionally when I had really strong mental noise. So I'd have like one track is repeating, may everyone be happy, may everyone be happy, may everyone be happy. And another track repeating metta, 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 metta. And having these 2 tracks going at the same time was enough to occupy the mind so that there was no room for any other wandering thoughts. So yeah, just be forceful, be persistent, be uncompromising. It's really important, be uncompromising. The more subtle approach is the approach of complete attention. And especially complete attention to your body. Pay complete attention to the sensations of your body as you go throughout the day, whatever you're doing. Not doing anything else with the mind except paying complete attention to your bodily experience. Not thinking about the bodily sensations, just feeling them with complete, rapt, fully engaged attention. This is a bit more subtle and challenging unless you're already well-versed in this kind of practice, but this also is an effective way of cutting off mental thinking.
Great. And Key asks, so would it be useful or not useful to contemplate, I am not this body, to cultivate non-attachment?
Yeah, that's a great practice. Yeah. Okay.
And last question, Sally says, thanks, Bhante. How about afraid to be reborn to awful bad realms is unwholesome? How to eliminate the sense of self is reborn?
Well, one thing is you actually should face that fear. Just acknowledge there's a chance that if I don't attain enlightenment in this life, that I'll be reborn somewhere unpleasant. There's a chance of it. Face that. You've spent countless lifetimes in miserable places. You might spend some more. It's okay. As long as you keep your mind focused on the Dhamma, then eventually that will come back to the surface and you'll be reborn somewhere relatively pleasant with access to the Dhamma. But along the way, you might go through some more planes of misery. That's how it is. You'll get through it. It won't be pleasant, but you'll get through it. So keep building up your affinity with the Dhamma. Keep building up your connection with the Dhamma. Keep building up your aspiration to live with the Dhamma and practice the Dhamma. And that will keep coming to the surface. But yeah, accept the fact that you might go through some more unpleasant rebirths. That's samsara. That's how it works. Come to terms with it. Okay.
Thank you, Bante. And I think that's all for this morning.
Jen has a question.
Yeah, I sometimes feel confused. There's times of detachment of the body, but there's a time we have to be completely with it to see the pain or the suffering.
So you do these at the same time. So Jen was asking, she said there's times when we're supposed to practice non-attachment towards the body, but also when we're supposed to be completely aware of it. But actually you do both. You should be completely aware of the body with an attitude of non-attachment. So you're completely aware of what the body is feeling, but you're allowing it to change. So whatever you feel it without attachment. You're like, I know exactly what this is, and if it changes, I don't mind. Or if it stays, I also don't mind. Whether it comes or goes, I don't mind. But either way, I'm going to pay full attention. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well, now it's really the end. Thank you very much, Bante, for tirelessly teaching us the suttas every morning and sharing Dharma in the evening. So we will be meeting again with Bante this evening at 7:30 p.m. He will be guiding us in meditation and then sharing some words of Dhamma. And we will be meeting again tomorrow at 8 a.m. and again tomorrow evening at 7:30 p.m. Basically every day, all day, every day. And all right. Tomorrow we will be finishing this sutta, so the second part of the Sabbāsava Sutta. So look forward to studying again with you, and thank you so much for all your great questions. And I really like what Donald says. I appreciate your all being here and your seriousness. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May all beings attain awakening. Have a great